Hi, welcome to this virtual PD session here at the beginning of the semester. And we are going to talk, just to open up our sessions today, we're going to talk about people first language and about a way that we can address or talk about individuals where we are focusing on them as a person rather than any other aspect of who they are as a human. And so first, let's talk about what is people first language. It is a way to speak about and to a person where you are acknowledging them as the person. You acknowledge the person first before the disability, and you describe what a person has, but you're focusing on the person. And sometimes you don't even need to do that. You just address the person or speak about who the person is without discussing their disability. But we all need to understand that a disability does not define who that person is, and it can be quite offensive and stigmatizing to refer to somebody as their disability rather than to them as an individual. And we are all more than one element of ourselves. On any given day, we have a bad day, and if we were identified for the rest of our lives based on that one bad day, it would be really unfortunate. We would hate that. And so if you think about an entire pie, each of our components of who we are as a person, our holistic development, are all different parts of the pie, different slices. And so somebody's perhaps learning disability or their inability to walk, and maybe they are a person who uses a wheelchair. That is just one slice of who they are as a person. And so we want to always keep that in the forefront of our mind when we are talking about or to an individual. Moving on, disability descriptors aren't appropriate hardly ever, but let's just discuss why it's not appropriate. It's because, first of all, someone's disability is nobody's business, right? It's their personal information, whether it's a learning or a physical disability for them. It is not something that really should be addressed publicly. And sometimes when we identify somebody and not using people first language, we are outing them, so to speak, of something that we all have is, different things that we want to keep confidential and private, and they have the right to have that as well. When we are not using people first language, we are focusing on the disability more than we are on the person. And the disability can be a consequence of their environment. And so it could speak to that. And we want to be careful not to indicate that in any way. It may be focusing on something that's out of their control if they were born that way. And so it's focusing on something they can't do anything about, which is not fair to that person. It can also, by referring to somebody and not using people first language, it can indicate a perception on a person's ability and limit other people's perception of what they are capable of as an individual. And we don't want to stunt that in any way. And it also encourages talking about the person instead of directly to the person. And so I put a picture up of an individual utilizing a wheelchair in this slide to just kind of indicate sometimes we see the interpreter or we see the person assisting an individual utilizing a wheelchair, but we don't necessarily acknowledge the person who has a disability. So there have been times where we have all referred to somebody in a manner that is not utilizing people first language. And I think the first step is to just acknowledge that sometimes we've grown up in an environment where we've heard the opposite. We've heard people referred to with their disability first rather than them as an individual first. And some examples that I've heard from the building when I discussed with our special education teachers, some things that they have observed and heard are things such as, do you have that Downs kid in your class this semester? Well, that's not referring to them as an individual. That's not people first language, okay? Another one, how did your sub handle the BD kid during library today? So that's another example of not using people first language. And are you requiring a speech from, the silent kid, right? So a voluntary mute individual who is choosing not to speak ever in a classroom setting, you would want to refer to them in a different manner. And I just gave an example of how not to refer to that student in this video. And if you did not catch it, go back and listen to it, because if you didn't catch it, it means that you are more comfortable hearing an individual referred to by their disability first rather than people first language. So go back and see if you can catch it if you did not hear it. But let's look at some ways to say things appropriately. So if you are stuck with ways to discuss a student in the classroom or in a meeting, try to say a person with disabilities instead of disabled person. You could say he has autism, right? Rather than saying the autistic girl, right? You could say he has Down syndrome rather than the Downs kid, which is one of the examples I gave a moment ago. You could say she receives special education services rather than referring to that individual as a SPED kid. You could say she has a developmental delay rather than she's retarded. I think that we all can agree that that is an outdated term. Even mentally disabled is a more universally accepted term, but still not really an appropriate way to refer to somebody with a developmental delay or cognitive delay. So you would want to use a more appropriate term there. And then the last one, he needs or he uses special education rather than he has special needs. So make sure that you are really thinking about the way that you refer to your students in front of other students, in front of teachers, in front of their parents, and within yourself, in your own mind. How do you see your students? Do you see them as a person first, or do you see the disability first? Which is, a question that we all should be asking ourselves. These are my references from the information that you got today. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks so much.